Hello, so in this next video, we're going to explore this question, which is why do we need safe workplace cultures or safe places, safe environments for us to work in? And it might seem like an obvious question, but there is a little bit more to this than meets the eye. To fully understand the importance of safe workplace cultures, we need to take a look at our next slide. Okay, so we can see here that we've got a group of our ancient ancestors. They are working and living together in what we can assume, quite fairly assume, was dangerous times, lots of challenges, lots of risks. So let's ask ourselves some important questions. What would make this group feel secure, safe, and comfortable? And how would we know that they are feeling secure, safe, and comfortable? What would indicate that they are feeling and experiencing a safe and comfortable state? It's likely we will see them engaging in certain types of behaviour, saying and doing things that would tell us that they are actually feeling comfortable, they are safe around each other, and they are feeling secure in their environment. Now we can flip that perspective. So that perspective, we could say, what would we notice if they felt unsafe, if they felt fearful or anxious? What would we see them doing and not doing? Would they be problem solving, or would they be in a protective state? What would indicate to us that actually they are feeling like they now need to protect themselves? So the point that I'm trying to make here is that as human beings, we are hardwired for survival. We've been brilliant at it. I mean, look how long our species has survived, for all the way from ancient history, and those early days when we weren't the highest thing on the food chain. We're brilliant at survival, and part of that survival is that we're great at creating safety. We seek out safety because safety is a fundamental need that helps us achieve our survival. We constantly scan for risks, fill in the gaps, avoid the unknown and uncertain, and then default to protecting ourselves and keeping ourselves safe when we become fearful, anxious, or uncertain of the future. So fast forward that, how does that translate into our modern day environment? Well, survival mode is still very much part of our DNA. If we are fearful, anxious, and feeling like we're unsafe in any way, we will display defensive behaviours, protective behaviours. We might withdraw, we might attack or challenge, avoid, blame, or even misdirect. Does this sound familiar? Yes, it does, because we see people behaving like this in workplace cultures and environments where they don't feel safe. So let's bring our understanding of our brains and the why we do this, even today in our modern professional environments, let's bring it right up to modern times. Okay, so why are we still responding in a way that we were responding millions of years ago when our environments are very different? We're not being chased by predators. We're unlikely to find our village or our home being pillaged by the next door neighbours. Well, our brains have developed. Our minds, our awareness, our logic, all of these fantastic things have developed over time. But we still need to understand how our brains work today in order to answer this question. So what you can see here is a diagram of three brains. Each part has a piece of it highlighted. And this is really how our brains work and have developed over a long period of time. Now, this is quite a simple explanation I'm going to take you through. And if you want to dive into it, it's really interesting stuff. And there will be some resources available. So over on the left-hand side, we can see something referred to as our lizard brain. This is the oldest part of our brain. It's what really developed first. And you might have also heard it described as a reptilian brain. It's the part of our brain from here that we have developed things like our fight, flight, and freeze responses, and where that is activated even today. Just like a reptile, this is where we and many of our instincts have developed from. So if we move across to the right, we've then got our mammal brain. So a little bit newer. This is where we developed and learned to live in groups. We knew that if we were in groups or communities, our chances of survival were a lot greater. And you can see here something called the limbic system, which has been referred to. And this is what we often refer to as our emotional brain. It's the part of our brain that really regulates things like our mood, our motivations, and our social behaviours, like caring for our young. So it's a really important part of our development and our evolution, because not only did we learn how to take better care of ourselves and each other's and work in these groups and communities that ultimately meant that our survival was going to be greater, but it's really where our emotions start to stem from. Now, something that's really important to understand about this part of our brain and the evolution of it was that, yes, we learned to live in groups, but to be able to live in those groups, one of the things that we were still seeking out were norms, safety. Can I predict the behaviours and the patterns of the people around me? Is everybody acting in a normal way within normal parameters? And if they're not, do they actually pose a threat to our safety and therefore our survival? So we are used to looking across groups, teams, communities, and looking for those norms of behaviour, norms of actions, norms of mood. If we don't see that, then that's where we might perceive somebody as being different, as being a bit of a threat. Okay, let's carry on. So the final part of our brain to develop over on the left is what we call our human brain. This is the youngest part of our brain, and it's where things like our executive function resides. So our ability to plan. We've got this highly complex neocortex and cerebral cortex that allows us to be able to do things like advanced thinking, to be able to prioritize, and really do a lot of the things that our modern logical brains are able to do today. So, what does this all have to do with workplace culture? Well, we're going to dive into that on our next slide. Okay, so let's link this to workplace culture and why having a safe and secure workplace culture is so important, because after all, we've got these newly developed human brains. We know that we're not being chased by animals. We know that nothing is out to get us, that we're unlikely to come to any sort of fatal harm or danger within the modern workplace. But there's a few questions that I think are quite interesting to ask ourselves. So question number 1 here, you can see, which part of our brain is the strongest and most likely to take over when things become stressful? Well, actually, that's our lizard brain or our reptilian brain. It's still the most powerful activating part of our brain. It's had plenty of time to work out. And also it's very instinctual, so it's primed for keeping us safe. So imagine that maybe you're in a meeting where things are getting stressful and maybe you're feeling a little bit uncertain or on edge or anxious. It could be a high stakes presentation with a client. Again, we're upping the anxiety, we're upping the threat level, the risk level here. So what takes over at the moment that we really don't want it to take over is our very instinctual, very protective, very well developed lizard brain. Next question, which part of our brain is the first to shut down when we become stressed or fearful? You've got it. It's the newest and youngest part of our brain, which is our human brain, which has all that wonderful executive function and, abstract thinking, and it has imagination in there. It also has that wonderful logic, that self-awareness. And we lose that when our stress levels become so overwhelmed that our human brain shuts down and our reptilian brain takes over. Great, just what you want when you're in a high stakes presentation. Okay, which of our 5 senses is the first to shut down when we go into survival mode? And this is really important. If you are thinking it's your hearing, you would be right. Now, you're in a high stakes meeting and you're feeling stressed. Your lizard brain is now starting to take over. So you're feeling potentially that fight, flight, or freeze, which is quite common. And that's something I personally have experienced, but that's all starting to take over. Your logic, your human brain, your executive function, your ability to sort of stay present is shutting down, and now your hearing is shutting down. So this is a really powerful combination, particularly when you see people who are starting to become highly stressed, fearful, frightened, intimidated, anxious within these workplace environments. Finally, let's talk about hormones, because we are biological creatures. So, which hormones influence our reactions and responses to survival situations or stressful situations? Now, bearing in mind, our brains are very, very old. So, we're not telling the difference between the saber-toothed tiger and maybe the really shouty colleague or manager or stakeholder who's clearly getting visibly angry. A risk is a risk, and our brain is responding to that. Well, the hormones that really influence us in these moments where we feel we might be going into survival mode are adrenaline and cortisol. So, adrenaline's going to start getting our blood pumping, it's going to be fueling energy and making sure our blood is redirected to things like our muscles. It's going to be getting us ready to fight or flight. And cortisol, well, that's really going to be spiking. So, that's going to be getting us ready to have a response of some description. And both of those are really intense, very powerful hormones that, if we aren't able to soothe the system in the moment, are actually going to have quite a detrimental result. And if our workplace cultures are constantly stressful, constantly putting us into a fearful state, those hormones stay elevated for long periods of time. And we now know, the research, the data is there, that can have a very detrimental effect on our physical, our mental, and our emotional health. So our brains and our biology operate pretty much as they did hundreds of thousands of years ago. We are primed for survival, even in our modern day workplaces. It's so important for us to feel safe, to be at our best. Otherwise, our human brains, they, with all the amazing things that they can do, they can still take our human brain, that is our modern day brain, offline. And then we will operate in that survival mode, that instinctive mode. We will display protective behavior that I described earlier in this video. So let's have a look at our final slide. Okay, so our final slide and our takeaway here is that we need to understand the way that our brains work, the way we work emotionally and hormonally, and the link to our need for psychological safety. Now, that might be a term that you've already heard, you're familiar with. It might be a new one, and I'm going to record a video that talks about what psychological safety is and what it isn't. But what we're highlighting here is that in order for people to be able to operate with their human brains, their modern brains, to be operating in that creative space, problem solve, decision making, empowerment, to be able to act, perform, and really engage with each other in their best selves, we need to be able to activate the right parts of our brain, calm the systems down that aren't really going to be helpful in the modern professional workplace. And in order to do that, we really need workplace cultures and workplace environments that make us feel safe, where we feel psychologically safe to be able to operate in an open, free, transparent, and ultimately perform at our best kind of state. So I hope that's giving you a bit of a deeper understanding as to why we need safety in our workplace cultures, why we need safe, psychologically safe environments. And I hope you can explore some of the other videos that I've created on this topic. Thank you.